I've kept a ledger every day for 41 years. Rain, wind, the price of feed, which cow calved and which one didn't make it. Small facts, honest ones. A man my age learns to trust the small facts because the big ones, love, luck, God's plan, those tend to lie to you. So when folks in Ardell County tell you that Marianne Vess was a woman no man would ever have, understand that they weren't being cruel. They believed it the way I believe the barometer. It was just a fact to them. She was 38. She'd been left once at the church door and buried a man she almost married after that, and she spent her days hauling water to a dying ranch and her nights sitting with a father who no longer remembered her name. The whole town had done the arithmetic and closed the book. I'd closed it too. I'm not proud of that. What I'm going to tell you is the one time in 41 years my ledger was wrong about the small facts, and how a stranger with dust on his collar and grief in his walk made me tear out a page and start over. Give me a minute. My hands don't work like they used to. It started with the fire. Not a big one. That's the thing nobody understands about the worst nights of your life. They rarely announce themselves. It was a grass fire out on the Vess place, late September, the kind of dry September where the wind comes down off the mesa carrying nothing but the smell of things about to burn. I was on my porch when I saw the glow. Orange, low, wrong. I remember I dropped my coffee and it broke on the boards and I didn't stop to look at it. I'm 73. I hadn't moved that fast since the Carter administration. By the time I got my truck onto the county road, half of Ardell was already headed the same direction, headlights strung out in the dark like a rosary. That's the one decent thing about a place like this. Nobody comes to your church, nobody comes to your funeral if it's inconvenient, but a fire they'll come for. A fire everybody understands. The Vess ranch sat in a shallow bowl of land, and when I crested the last rise I could see the whole shape of the trouble. The grass was going up along the south fence line, a bright crawling seam of it, and the wind was pushing it toward the outbuildings, toward the house. And there, small, black against the orange, swinging a wet feed sack like she meant to beat the entire prairie into submission with it, was Marianne. Alone. She was always alone, that was the fact. I want to tell you I ran to help her. I did eventually. But there's a half-second I've never told anybody about, a shameful half-second where I stood by my truck and thought, she can't save it. Nobody could. Let it burn and maybe the poor woman will finally be free of this place. God forgive me, I thought that. And then a truck I didn't recognize came off the road so hard it took the ditch on 2 wheels, and a man I'd never seen jumped out before it had fully stopped, and he ran not toward the fire, not toward the house, straight toward her. He grabbed her by the shoulders. I was close enough now to hear it. "You'll kill yourself," he said, not shouting, just certain. "Then I'll die on my own land," she said, and shoved past him and swung the sack again. I have thought about those 2 sentences more than I have thought about almost anything in my life. His name was Wade Culhane, and nobody in Ardell had asked for him. We found out the particulars over the next few days the way you always do, in pieces, at the feed store, from Loretta at the diner who considers gossip a form of public service. He drifted in from somewhere north. Wyoming, maybe Montana. He'd taken day work at the Bly place breaking a couple of green horses, which told us he knew animals, and he'd paid cash for a week at the Ardell Motor Lodge, which told us he didn't plan to stay. Nobody knew why he'd been on the county road that night. Nobody thought to be grateful, either, not at first, because we're proud people out here, and we don't like being reminded that a stranger loved our neighbor's ranch enough to fight for it before we did. They saved the house. Not the south barn, that went, and with it most of the winter hay, which was its own quiet catastrophe that wouldn't announce itself until January. But they saved the house, the well pump, and old Elias Vess asleep in his bed the whole time, unaware that his daughter and a man he'd never meet as a stranger had just kept the roof over his head. When the county truck finally showed and the fire was down to black stubble and steam, I found Marianne sitting on her porch step with her hands hanging between her knees, staring at nothing. Wade was standing a little ways off, giving her room, and I understood then that he was a man who knew how to give a person room, which is rarer than you'd think. I sat down next to her, my knees cracked like green wood. "You all right, Mari?" I said. She didn't look at me. "You know what the worst part is, Hollies." Her voice was flat, sanded down. "I keep thinking I should feel something, and I don't. I'm just tired." I didn't have an answer. I'm not a man who has answers. I reached into my pocket and worried the old watch my father left me. It stopped in 1979 and I never fixed it. I just carry it. I don't know why. My daughter says it's morbid, and I let the silence sit. After a while, Wade came over with a cup of water from the well and handed it to her without a word. She took it, drank, handed the cup back, and something passed between them that I couldn't name, that wasn't romance yet, that was too tired to be romance. It was just two people acknowledging that the other one existed and mattered. You'd think that'd be the beginning of the love story. It wasn't. It was the beginning of everybody in town deciding it couldn't be one. Let me tell you about Marianne, so you understand what the town had given up on. 20 years back, she'd been the prettiest girl in Ardell, and I don't say that lightly, and I don't say it the way men usually say it. She was sharp. She could fix a carburetor and quote scripture and beat any boy in the county at cards, and she had a laugh that made you feel like you'd said something clever even when you hadn't. Her daddy Elias ran 300 head back then, and everyone assumed Marianne would marry well and inherit better. She got engaged at 22 to a boy named Tom Reddick. Good family. Wedding was set. And on the morning of it, I was there. I was in the third pew. Tom didn't come. Just didn't come. Left a note at his mother's and drove to Amarillo and never explained himself to a living soul. She stood in that church in her mother's dress for 40 minutes before her daddy walked up the aisle and told her, and I watched her face do something I've never forgotten. It didn't crumple, that's what I mean about her. It went still, like a pond freezing, and she took off the veil, folded it neat, and walked out under her own power, and she never cried where anyone could see. That break most people for a season. What broke her for good came later. 5 years on, she'd let herself love again, a rancher named Del Foyt, older, kind, patient with her, and he courted her slow for 2 years like she was a spooked horse, and she finally started to thaw. They didn't rush to the church. She wouldn't, but everyone knew. And then Del's tractor rolled on the north slope in a spring rain and took him under, and it was Marianne who found him, and that was the end of Marianne Vess as far as Ardell County was concerned. Twice, the story went. Twice love had walked her right up to the edge of a happy life and then either run off or died on her. After the second one, she stopped going to dances, stopped going to church, even mostly. Her mother passed, her father started slipping in the mind, and she folded herself down into the smallest possible life. The ranch, the old man, the water, the fences. Cursed, the older women said, in the tone they reserve for things they half believe. Bad luck, said the men. That poor woman, said everyone, and then went home to their own suppers and didn't think about her again. We gave up on her, all of us. It was easier than the alternative, which was to keep hopping on her behalf and keep being disappointed. Hope is expensive. Ardell is a poor county. So you can imagine what it did to us when the stranger stayed. He didn't leave after his week at the motor lodge. He extended it. Then he stopped extending it and rented old man Pruitt's line shack out past the creek for next to nothing, and he kept turning up at the Vess place, not courting her, not at first, or not in any way you could point at. He'd just show up and do things. Mend the fence the fire took, dig out the well housing. He rebuilt the collapsed corner of the south barn with lumber he paid for himself. And when Marianne tried to give him money, he wouldn't take it. And when she got angry about that, and she did. I heard about it, the whole town heard about it. He said something that Loretta swears she got second-hand but accurate. I'm not doing it for you, he told her. I'm doing it because a thing worth building shouldn't be let fall down. If that happens to be your barn, that's your luck, not mine. Which is the kind of thing a man says when he means the exact opposite and can't afford to admit it. I started paying attention then. Not gossiping, paying attention, which is different, though I grant the line is thin. I'd drive past the Vess place slower than I needed to. I'd note things in my ledger that had no business in a weather log. Sep 30, wind SW Culhane truck at Vess place, second day running. Oct 4, first frost, Culhane fixing windmill. Oct 9, saw M laugh. That last one I wrote down because I hadn't seen it in 9 years, and I wanted a record that it had happened. Here's the thing about Wade Culhane that took me the longest to understand. He was not a healthy man in the heart. I don't mean sick, I mean he carried something. You could see it in how he stood, a little braced, like a man expecting weather. He never talked about where he came from or why he'd left it, and out here we respect that. We've all got a north we don't discuss, but there was a specific weight to his quiet. A man running toward something walks different than a man running from something, and Wade walked like both at once. Whatever he was running from, I came to believe it was the same size as what Marianne was running from, and I think that's why they recognized each other. Not because they were alike, because they were matched. Two people the world had decided were finished. The town, meanwhile, went to work. You have to understand how a small place protects itself from hope. It's not malice. It's a kind of terrible tenderness. The women who'd known Marianne since she was a girl started dropping by with casseroles and warnings folded together, the way you'd hide a pill in a dog's meat. He's a drifter, honey. You don't know a thing about him. Men like that don't stay. You of all people know that. I just hate to see you hurt again. That's all. I couldn't bear to watch it a third time. That last one, a third time, that's the one that did the damage, because it wasn't about Wade at all. It was them saying out loud the thing they'd all decided, that Marianne was a woman things happened to. A woman with a pattern, and patterns don't break. Patterns are the most reliable small fact of all. I watched her start to believe it. That was the cruelest part. She'd been doing better. I'd seen her laugh, remember, October 9th. I have it written down, and then the tenderness of the town got into her like water into a wound, and I watched her go still again. That freezing pond stillness. She started finding reasons Wade shouldn't come around. She got sharp with him. Told him the barn was fixed. The fence was fixed. There was nothing left for him to do here. He should move on. There were ranches up north that pay him real wages. Why was he wasting himself on a dead place and a dead woman? I wasn't there for that. But I was there for what came after, and I'll tell it as straight as I can. It was the 3rd week of October, and I'd driven out with a load of hay for her, mine to give, since the fire took hers. And don't make more of it than it was. We do that for each other out here. It's not charity, it's insurance. My barn could burn next. I found Wade's truck already there and the two of them out by the wrecked south barn in the cold, and I could tell from 50 yards that I'd walked into the middle of something. So I stayed by my truck, and I pretended to fuss with the hay, and I heard more than I should have. Not asking you to marry me, Wade was saying, rough, tired. God, Marianne, I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm asking you to stop pretending I'm the same as the ones who left. You'll leave too. Her voice was ice. Everybody leaves or dies. I've done the reading, Wade. I know how my story goes. You don't know a damn thing about how your story goes. And here his voice cracked, and I looked up despite myself, and I saw him take his hat off, a thing he never did. That man lived in his hat and hold it against his chest like he was at a graveside. You want to know why I was on that road the night of the fire? You never asked. You never once asked. She didn't say anything. My wife died 2 years ago. He said it flat, the way you say a thing you've had to learn to carry. And my little girl 6 months after, fever. There was nothing anybody could have done, the doctors said, but I've never once believed them, and I got in my truck the day after we buried her, and I have not stopped driving since. I don't stop anywhere. I take the work and I move on before it can happen again. before I can care about a single living thing enough to lose it. The wind came down off the mesa. I remember it because it carried the cold and I wanted it to carry me away too. I didn't want to be hearing this, but I couldn't move. I was on that road, he said, quieter now, because I'd decided to leave Ardell that night. I was driving out, and I saw the glow and I thought, don't stop, Wade, you fool, whatever it is, don't stop. And then I saw it was a person out there alone fighting a fire nobody was coming to help her fight, and I stopped. He put his hat back on. His hands were shaking. I could see it from where I stood. First time in 2 years I stopped. And I've been trying to figure out ever since whether I saved your ranch or you saved my life. And I think the honest answer is I don't want to leave anymore. And that terrifies me worse than staying ever could. Marianne stood there, still as the frozen pond. And I truly thought she was going to freeze him out. Fold the veil, walk up the aisle under her own power, survive it the way she'd survived everything. Instead, she said the thing I've turned over in my head every day since. I don't know how to want something, she said, and not have it break me when it goes. Neither do I, Wade said. Maybe that's the only true thing either of us has got. Maybe we start there. I got in my truck and I drove home, and I didn't unload the hay. I sat in my kitchen in the dark and I got out my ledger and I did not know what to write. Because here's what I understood sitting there. The whole county, myself included, had spent years feeling sorry for Marianne Vess, and not one of us had ever once stopped to consider that she wasn't broken. She was braced, same as Wade. She'd been holding a fire back with a wet feed sack, alone in the dark, because she had decided a long time ago that the only safe way to love anything was to love it enough to fight for it and expect nothing back. Her ranch. Her father, who didn't know her name. She'd been practicing a kind of love the rest of us were too comfortable to understand. Love with no reward in it. Love that just keeps swinging the sack. And we called that bad luck. We called that a pattern. We gave up on her because it was cheaper than seeing her clearly. I wrote 3 words in my ledger that night. Not weather, not feed prices. I was wrong. Then I sat there a while longer, worrying my father's broken watch, listening to the clock that does work tick in the hall, and I thought about how the town would take it when they found out Wade Culhane was staying. Because they would find out. Loretta already suspected. And I knew, the way you know a storm is coming before the barometer confirms it, that the hardest part of Marianne's love story wasn't going to be whether Wade stayed. It was going to be whether Ardell County would let her have it. We're not good at hope out here. We'd have to learn. And some of us, God help us, would rather see her freeze over again than admit we'd been wrong about her for 20 years. I decided that night I wasn't going to be one of them. I just wasn't sure yet what that would cost me, or what it would cost her, when the whole town found out what I already knew. The town found out the way towns always find out, not through anybody deciding to tell, but through the slow accumulation of trucks parked where trucks hadn't parked before. By the first week of November, Wade Culhane's pickup was at the Vess place more nights than it was at the Line Shack. Nobody had announced anything. There was nothing to announce, but Loretta at the diner started setting 2 cups when Marianne came in, and Marianne stopped correcting her. And in Ardell County, that is as good as a wedding band's read 3 Sundays running. I'd like to tell you the town rose to it, that we looked at that woman we'd pitied for 20 years and felt glad. Some did. Loretta did. She'd been quietly on Marianne's side her whole life, the way the town's gossip is so often also its last soft heart. But most of Ardell did the thing I'd been afraid of. Most of Ardell got nervous. Because a woman who is cursed is a comfortable thing to have in a town. You feel for her. You bring her a casserole. You go home grateful it isn't you. But a woman who was never cursed, a woman who was just left alone by every one of us for 20 years while we told ourselves a story about bad luck, that woman is an accusation. And nobody likes to be accused, least of all by their own conscience wearing a neighbor's face. So the talk turned, slow, mean in the way that dresses itself as concern. Where'd he really come from, though? A man doesn't just appear. You know she came into money when her mother passed. Little bit of land anyway. Funny a drifter'd smell that out. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying nobody knows a thing about him and she's not thinking straight. Hasn't for years, poor thing. I heard it all at the feed store, at the diner, at church on the Sundays I still made myself go. And I'm ashamed to say I didn't fight it as hard as I should have at first. I'd nod. I'd say, well, we'll see. Because that half-second of cowardice I told you about, the one by my truck the night of the fire, when I thought let it burn, that half-second lives in all of us. And it doesn't die just because you've written I was wrong in your ledger. Being wrong in private is easy. It's being right out loud, where your neighbors can hear you, that costs. What changed me was Elias. You have to remember old Elias Vess in all of this, because the town mostly forgot him, and so, God help me, he was the reason Marianne's whole life had folded down to that ranch. He was the anchor and the weight. 86 years old and his mind gone soft as spring mud. Some days he thought Marianne was her mother. Some days he thought the year was 1961, and he was a young man with 300 head and a wife who loved him. And some days he didn't say anything at all, just sat in the window looking out at the land like it might tell him who he was. Wade started sitting with him. Nobody asked him to. That's the thing about that man I keep coming back to. He'd finish whatever he was mending and he'd come in and sit with Elias, this old stranger who couldn't hold his name for 10 minutes together, and he'd just talk to him. About horses, about the weather, about nothing. And I know this because Marianne told me, months later, and when she told me her voice did a thing I'd never heard it do. The first week Daddy kept calling him Dell, she said. Dell, you remember Dell? I did, the one the tractor took. I thought Wade would hate that, being called by a dead man's name by a man who doesn't know he's doing it. She stopped. And Wade just said yes, sir, and answered to it, every time, for a week. He let my father have Dell back because it made the old man calm, and it cost Wade nothing but his own name, and here she couldn't finish it and she didn't have to. That's not a drifter smelling out a little bit of land. I want you to sit with that. A man who was running from every living thing he could care about, because caring had cost him a wife and a daughter. That man sat down beside a dying old stranger and answered to a dead man's name for a week to buy him some peace. When Marianne told me that, I stopped nodding at the feed store. I started saying, you're wrong about him, and I've seen it up close, and I'll thank you to say it in front of me if you're going to say it at all. Cost me 2 friendships that weren't worth what I'd thought they were. Best trade I ever made. But I'm getting ahead of the hard part, and I promised to tell it straight. The hard part came in December, and it was the kind of thing my ledger has no column for. Elias took a fall. Nighttime, got up confused, thought there were cattle to see to, went out into the cold in his nightclothes and went down on the ice by the well and lay there some part of the night before Marianne found him. He didn't break exactly, but something in an old man that age, once it's jarred loose, doesn't set back right. The doctor in the county seat used careful words, managing his comfort, a matter of making him easy. We all know what those words mean out here. We've all translated them at one bedside or another. And here's where the story stops being a love story for a while and becomes something harder. Because Elias needed care that ranch couldn't give. Round the clock. There was a place, a home, a good one in Amarillo 90 miles off that could take him. And it cost. It cost more than the Vess ranch made in a year, more than it had made in 5. Marianne had exactly one thing worth that kind of money. The land. You see it now. The choice that had no clean side to it. She could keep the ranch, the thing she'd bled for, the thing she'd fought a fire for with a wet feed sack in the dark, the last piece of who her family had been, and watch her father go without the care that might make his last months bearable. Or she could sell it, all of it, to send an old man who didn't know her name to a clean, warm room 90 miles away where she could visit him twice a month if the truck held together, and be left, at 38, with nothing. No land, no father soon, a love barely a season old and a town waiting to say told you so. The town, of course, had opinions. The town always has opinions about other people's impossible choices. She can't sell. That land's been Vess land 100 years. She's got to sell. What kind of daughter wouldn't? This is that drifter's doing, mark me. He'll have her sell, and then he'll be gone with whatever's left. That last one enraged me so badly I nearly went to fists over it, at 73, in the feed store, and I'd have lost. But I'll tell you what Wade actually did, because I was there for this one, all of it, and I'll carry it to my own bed in Amarillo or wherever they finally put me. Marianne called a few of us out to the ranch. Not many. Me, Loretta, the doctor, Pastor Ray's, people she trusted to help her think. And Wade stood at the back of the kitchen with his hat in his hands and said nothing while she laid it out, the whole impossible arithmetic in that flat, sanded-down voice, and you could see it costing her every word. When she was done, the room was quiet. Nobody wants to be the one to tell a woman to sell her family's land. Nobody wants to be the one to tell her to let her father suffer. Wade spoke then, first time all evening. "Sell it to me." We all looked at him. "I've got money," he said. "Not much. Enough. 2 years of taking every job and spending nothing and sleeping in a truck adds up. It was going to be for a place of my own someday when I finally stopped. It's about what the ranch is worth near enough." He turned his hat in his hands. "Sell it to me. Elias gets his room in Amarillo, and the land stays yours to work same as now, only it's my name on the paper the bank can come after instead of yours. You lose nothing but the deed. You keep the ground." The kitchen was so quiet I could hear my own broken watch not ticking in my pocket, which is a foolish thing to say, but it's how I remember it. And Marianne, I have never seen a person look at another person the way she looked at him then. It wasn't gratitude. Gratitude is warm and small. This was something that had had all its skin taken off. "You'd spend everything you have," she said, "on a dying man who doesn't know your name and calls you Dell, and a ranch that'll never turn a profit, and a woman who's told you a dozen times she doesn't know how to keep anybody." "Yes," Wade said. "Why?" And he said quiet to the floor because I don't think he could look at her and say it, because I sat in my truck for 2 years telling myself I couldn't afford to care about anything again, and it turns out the not caring cost more. It cost me every single day, so I'm done paying that. And if it all breaks, if the old man passes and the ranch fails and you freeze me right out, then I'll have lost some money in 2 years' savings, and I'll still be better off than I was the day before the fire, because I'll have tried. And I forgot, Marianne. I truly forgot that trying was even a thing a person was allowed to do. Pastor Ray's was wiping his eyes. Loretta had given up pretending not to cry. And me, I was doing the ledger in my head. The real ledger, the one under the weather and the feed prices. And for the first time in a long time the small facts and the big facts agreed. This was not bad luck. This was not a pattern. This was a man and a woman, both of them braced against weather their whole lives, deciding at the same moment to put the sack down and just hold on to each other in the open and take whatever came. She sold him the ranch. For $1, and the promise is the truth of it, though they papered it proper for the bank's sake. Elias went to Amarillo. He passed in February easy in a warm room, and on his last clear afternoon he called Marianne by her own name, not her mother's, and told her the land looked good this year, and she said, "Yes, Daddy, it does," and that was the last thing he ever said to her that was true. They married in the spring, small. In the yard, not the church, she'd had enough of churches. Pastor Ray's did it anyway, standing in the grass where the south barn had burned, which Wade had rebuilt a second time better. Half the town didn't come. The half that had spent 20 years feeling sorry for her and couldn't stand to be there for the part where they'd been wrong. The other half came. Loretta cried through the whole thing. I stood up as a witness because Marianne asked me to, and me being asked to stand up for anybody at my age is a thing I did not expect the Lord to arrange. And I signed the paper with a hand that shook, and I was glad of the shaking because it gave me something to look at that wasn't my own face. I could stop there. It would be a neat ending and you'd close the book satisfied and I'd be lying to you. And I told you at the start I'm a man who trusts small, honest facts, so I won't. Because the town was half right about one thing, and I'd be a coward not to say it. Loving somebody doesn't break the weather. The mesa still sends its wind down. The drought this last summer was the worst in 30 years, and the Vess Ranch, I still call it the Vess Ranch, everyone does, is not making it. They're behind at the bank, the one Wade put his own name in front of so it couldn't come after her. There are nights I drive past slow, the way I always have, and I see the two of them out on the porch not talking, just sitting close in the dark, and I know from the set of their shoulders that they've been doing the arithmetic again, the hard kind, the kind with no clean side. They might lose it, the land, after everything. I write the weather in my ledger every day, and the weather does not care what those two people spent to be together, and I'd be lying if I told you it'll come right. But here is the small fact I keep, the one I tore out the old page for. I stopped by last week with a load of feed mine to give. Don't make more of it than it is. And Marianne was out by the fence in the failing light, and Wade came out of the barn and stood beside her, and he didn't touch her, just stood close, and she leaned, I saw it. I have it written down, she leaned into him. That woman who went still as a frozen pond at the church door 20 years ago and never once let anybody see her thaw. She leaned into him like a person who has decided that the going of a thing is worth the having of it. Like a person who has stopped, at last, doing the reading on how her story ends. I got in my truck. I didn't unload the feed right away. I sat there worrying my father's watch, the one that stopped in '79, the one I never fixed because some things you carry aren't meant to keep working. They're just meant to remind you that they ran once, and beautifully, and that the stopping was never the whole of the story. The town gave up on her love story. So did I, for one shameful half-second by my truck in the firelight. We were all of us wrong. I don't know if they'll keep the ranch. I don't know how many more summers that land has got, or those two, or me. Nobody does. That's not a thing my ledger has a column for. But she leaned into him in the failing light, and he let her, and neither of them was bracing for weather. I wrote it down.